The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a pale orange glow across the rolling fields of rural Kansas. It should have been a sight of abundance, with acres of corn swaying gently in the breeze. But this year, the land was eerily quiet. The fields, once thriving with life, now stretched barren, cracked under the relentless weight of a season that had given nothing but hardship. Farmer Tom Marshall stood at the edge of his property, his calloused hands resting on the wooden fence. His eyes, weathered by decades of farming, now carried the weight of worry and despair. This year, the rain hadn't come. The skies had been empty, offering nothing but promises that never arrived. The once healthy crops had withered before his very eyes, leaving behind stalks that crumbled to dust in his palms. For a farmer like Tom, who lived off the land and relied on its bounty, not just to feed his family, but also to pay the bills, this failure wasn't just a bad year. It was life-altering. He had tried everything: borrowing water from neighbors, rationing the little he had, and praying to the heavens for a miracle. But the land was unforgiving, and Tom's resources were running out faster than the days on the calendar. As Tom leaned against the fence, his youngest daughter, Lily, ran up to him, clutching a tiny wilted flower she had found near the barn. "Dad, look," she said with innocent hope. "It's still alive." Tom forced a smile, ruffling her blonde hair as he took the fragile flower from her hands. It was a bitter reminder that even in devastation, small sparks of life could persist. But was it enough? Word of Tom's struggles had started to spread across the small farming community. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles and kind words, but they were fighting their own battles against the same dry season. Tom's wife, Sarah, tried to remain optimistic, packing lunches and keeping the household running as if everything was fine. But late at night, when the kids were asleep, Tom would catch her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of overdue bills and the foreclosure notice from the bank. The Marshalls weren't alone in their suffering, but that didn't make it any easier. What made it worse was knowing how hard they had worked, how much they had poured into their fields, their dreams, their legacy. And now it all seemed to be slipping away like sand through their fingers. One evening, as Tom sat by the old oak tree in their backyard, he overheard Sarah talking on the phone. Her voice was hushed, but carried an unmistakable urgency. "We just need a little help," she said. "Anything you can do. Please." Tom's heart sank. He hated the idea of asking for charity, but he knew Sarah was desperate. She had reached out to anyone she could think of: local organizations, charities, even strangers online. But no one seemed to have the means or willingness to help a single struggling farmer in the middle of nowhere. Then something unexpected happened. A few days later, a sleek black SUV pulled up the dusty gravel road leading to the Marshall farm. Tom, standing by the barn, squinted in confusion. Visitors weren't uncommon, but this vehicle was out of place, a polished, pristine machine amidst the rustic charm of the countryside. The driver stepped out first, dressed sharply in a suit that didn't belong anywhere near a farm. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Out stepped a tall, young man with a calm yet commanding presence. He was dressed casually, but there was something unmistakably dignified about him. "Mr. Marshall?" the young man asked, his voice polite but confident. Tom nodded cautiously, unsure of what to make of the situation. "I'm Barron Trump," the young man said, extending a hand. "I heard about what's been happening here. I think I can help." Tom stared at him, speechless. It wasn't every day that someone famous showed up on his doorstep, let alone someone as well known as Barron Trump. The name carried weight, but the young man standing before him didn't seem interested in showing it off. Instead, his expression was sincere, his tone humble. "I know it's been a tough season," Barron continued, "but I believe there's a way to turn things around." Tom didn't know what to say. He felt a mix of skepticism and cautious hope. Who was this young man, and why had he come all this way to help a struggling farmer he'd never met? Barron motioned toward the SUV, where a second man was unloading boxes. "I brought some supplies to get started: equipment, seeds, and, most importantly, a plan. I've been working with experts who specialize in sustainable farming. Together, we think we can revive your fields and make this land thrive again." For the first time in months, Tom felt a flicker of hope, but it was accompanied by a dozen unanswered questions. Why was Barron Trump doing this? Could his plan really work? And what would happen if it didn't? The answers would come in time. But for now, Tom could only stand there, staring at the young man who had arrived like a beacon of hope in his darkest hour. And just as Tom began to process what was happening, Barron turned to him with a smile. "Let's get to work," he said. Tom felt an unfamiliar mixture of emotions as Barron Trump's team began unloading supplies from the SUV. The sight of boxes labeled with agricultural tools and specialized seeds sparked a cautious optimism in his heart, but the skepticism remained. What did this young man know about farming? About their struggles? Yet there was something genuine about Barron's demeanor, something that made Tom want to believe he had come with good intentions. As the sun set and the cool evening breeze rolled in, Tom invited Barron inside. Sarah had set the kitchen table with coffee and fresh-baked cornbread, though she was just as unsure about their visitor as Tom. So Tom began, his hands clasped tightly. "Why us? Why now? You don't even know us." Barron smiled softly, taking a sip of the coffee before replying. "I read about your story. My team came across it while researching communities affected by drought and crop failure. There are countless farmers struggling across the country, but something about your family, about how hard you've worked to keep this farm alive, it stuck with me. I wanted to help because I believe that people like you are the backbone of this country. And if you're willing to trust me, I think we can turn things around." Tom exchanged a glance with Sarah, who was visibly moved but still hesitant. Trust wasn't something they could give easily, not after years of disappointment. But Tom could see the sincerity in Barron's eyes. It wasn't pity, it was respect. The next morning, Barron and his team got to work. The first step was analyzing the soil. They brought in experts to test its quality, examining what nutrients were missing and what could be done to restore it. Tom watched closely, learning more in a single afternoon than he had in years of trial and error. Barron didn't just oversee the process. He got his hands dirty, walking the fields with Tom, asking questions, and listening intently to the answers. For the first time in months, the farm buzzed with activity. Workers installed a new irrigation system that would make the most of every drop of water, while others planted drought-resistant seeds specifically chosen for the region's dry conditions. The Marshalls were cautious but curious, stepping in to help wherever they could. Even Lily and her older brother, Jake, found themselves swept up in the excitement, carrying tools and planting seeds with a renewed sense of hope. Still, not everyone in the community viewed Barron's arrival with the same optimism. Some neighbors whispered about ulterior motives, questioning why someone like him, wealthy, powerful, and far removed from the struggles of rural life, would care about a small farm in Kansas. Maybe he's just doing it for publicity, one neighbor remarked at the general store. Or maybe it's some kind of tax write-off. Tom couldn't ignore the murmurs, and they gnawed at the edges of his newfound hope. That evening, as he and Barron worked side by side repairing a broken fence, Tom decided to confront him. "I have to ask," Tom said, his voice steady but firm. "What's in this for you? People are talking, saying this might be more about your image than helping us." Barron paused, leaning against the fence post. "I get it," he said after a moment. "It's hard to believe someone would do this without wanting something in return. But the truth is, I've seen what happens when people lose faith in the land, in themselves. My family's story is very different from yours, but I know what it's like to feel the weight of expectations and the fear of failure. Helping your farm isn't about me. It's about what this farm represents, a way of life that's worth fighting for. If we can save it, maybe we can inspire others to do the same." Tom studied the young man's face and found no trace of deceit. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that Barron truly meant what he said. As the weeks passed, the farm began to show signs of revival. The once barren fields now had tiny green shoots breaking through the soil, a testament to the work that had been done. Tom and Sarah felt a cautious optimism returning to their daily lives, though the road ahead was still uncertain. But just as things seemed to be turning around, a new challenge arose. The bank, unimpressed by the farm's slow recovery, sent a final notice of foreclosure. They had given the Marshalls a strict deadline to repay their debts or risk losing the land for good. Tom felt the weight of the news crush him like a ton of bricks. He shared it with Sarah late one night, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what else we can do," he said, his hands trembling. Barron overheard the conversation and immediately sprang into action. He reached out to his network, calling on influential figures and organizations that could support the farm. But time was running out, and the tension mounted with every passing day. The climax loomed closer, as the farm stood on the brink of being taken away despite all their hard work. Tom felt torn between hope and despair, unsure if even Barron's efforts would be enough to save what generations of Marshalls had built. And yet, in the face of overwhelming odds, a sense of determination filled the air. Barron refused to give up, and his resolve inspired the Marshalls to keep fighting. Together, they were a team, united by a shared belief that no matter how bleak the circumstances, there was always a way forward. But would it be enough? To be continued. The deadline for the foreclosure loomed closer, and with every passing day, the tension on the farm grew heavier. Tom and Sarah did their best to keep up appearances for their kids, but the strain was evident. Even Barron, who had maintained his calm determination throughout, began to show signs of worry. The team worked tirelessly, implementing every last measure to squeeze life out of the recovering land. But it wasn't just about the crops anymore. They needed a miracle to save the farm from the bank. One evening, just days before the deadline, Barron received a call while standing under the glow of the porch light. The conversation was short, but when he hung up, there was a renewed energy in his expression. "We're not done yet," he told Tom, who had been sitting nearby, staring out into the dark fields. "I've reached out to some people who believe in what you're doing here. Let's see if they can help." The next day, as the sun rose, a convoy of vehicles arrived at the farm. Out stepped journalists, representatives from agricultural organizations, and even local government officials. Barron had called in every favor he could, and his connections had delivered. Cameras rolled as Tom and Sarah shared their story, the decades of hard work, the heartbreak of losing their crops, and the community's unyielding spirit. Barron stood beside them, emphasizing the importance of small farms like theirs and how they symbolized resilience in the face of adversity. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, donations began pouring in from across the country. Strangers who had never met the Marshalls but resonated with their struggle contributed whatever they could, from a few dollars to significant sums. A local businessman pledged to match donations up to a certain amount, and a nearby farming supply company offered free resources to keep the recovery efforts going. But the biggest surprise came when Barron revealed that he had used his own resources to negotiate directly with the bank. He had convinced them to extend the deadline, giving the Marshalls more time to get back on their feet. It wasn't just about paying off the debt. It was about securing the farm's future. As the final hours of the original deadline ticked away, Tom and Sarah stood on their porch, watching as the barren fields they had feared would be lost forever now showed signs of life. The irrigation system glistened in the sunlight, and the new crops, though small, promised a brighter tomorrow. Barron approached them, his hands in his pockets and a satisfied smile on his face. "It's not over yet," he said, "but you've got what you need to keep going. This land, it's yours." Tom's voice broke as he said, "I don't even know how to thank you. You didn't just save this farm, you saved our family." Barron shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Tom. This was your fight. I just gave you the tools to win it." In the weeks that followed, the Marshalls worked harder than ever. But this time, they had the support of a community that believed in them. Neighbors who had once doubted Barron's intentions now rallied behind the Marshalls, offering their help and encouragement. The farm not only survived but began to thrive, becoming an example of how perseverance, innovation, and a little generosity could turn the tide. As for Barron, he left quietly one morning, refusing any grand gestures of thanks. "This isn't about me," he told Sarah before leaving. "It's about showing what's possible when people come together." The Marshalls never forgot what he had done for them, and though they still faced challenges, they faced them with a newfound sense of hope and determination. Their story became a beacon for other struggling farmers, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a chance for redemption. And as Tom stood in his now flourishing fields one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he smiled for the first time in a long time. He knew that the land, his family's legacy, was safe, and that they had not only survived but grown stronger. In his heart, he carried the lesson Barron had left behind, that kindness and determination could change lives, one seed at a time.